Yo, what up, all my hopefully healthy homies? It's Melder here, bringing you another Arknights beginner guide. Okay, guys, so this is going to be the second class rundown video, and today's topic is going to be casters. So, first thing we're going to do is talk about casters as a whole. Then I'm going to separate them into different subclasses. And lastly, we're going to go over each and every caster operator and talk about their pros and cons. Casters fill a valuable role in any team composition. You can bring them to a variety of different scenarios and stages, and they will be your primary source of arts damage. For the caster subclasses, we have single target, otherwise referred to as ST casters. Then we have AoE casters, which stands for area of effect. Third, we have modal casters, meaning they have different modes that they switch from. Fourth, we have chain casters. And then lastly, we have a melee caster. I'm not sure what else to call them, but they don't fit in any of the other subclasses as of right now. We are here at the A-Ship Toolbox, and I will post a link to this lovely resource in the description down below. The first caster we're going to be talking about today is my personal favorite. This is Kobbe. She's a single target 6-star caster, and she has really versatile skills overall. Her skill 1 is an empowered auto attack that binds for 2.5 seconds. And what's really great about it is it can hold charges. So it really gives value to the SP that she gains over the course of the stage. Her skill 2 is this is our bread and butter skill. It's an attack speed increase, attack speed buff, and she prioritizes attacking the highest defense enemies. This synergizes with her first talent so very well. What her first talent does is it takes a percentage of the target's defense and converts it into additional arts damage that she deals to them. So she's really good at attacking high defense enemies and shredding tanks. Her skill 3, there's a lot to it, and this skill is overall pretty solid as well. And it expands her attack range to a 3x4 tile, similar to anti-air snipers. It converts her damage to physical, and it gives her an attack percentage buff. In addition to that, it also prioritizes the lowest defense enemy and silences them as well. So this is basically made for killing slugs, or the explodey slugs in Chapter 4, the frozen frost slugs or spiders in Chapter 6. This also is helpful for killing drones, as well as picking off some of the squishier foot soldiers, and she just one-shots them. The issues with Kobbe is mainly her SP cost, specifically on her skill 3. It is an 80 SP cost, so after she gets her first skill off, between the amount of SP she needs for her first skill and the duration of the skill itself, you're only going to be getting 1, maybe 2 of these skill 3s off, depending on the stage. Most of the time, anyways, you're going to be using her skill 2. Another bit of a con, maybe for beginner players, is her target priority is a bit weird to get used to in some situations, but I would say that her kit synergizes with herself pretty well, so she's going to be auto-attacking all the right units. Next up is going to be Afiala. Afiala is the second single target 6-star caster, and even though she's labeled as single target, she really is just a cheap AoE caster in disguise. Afiala is really great. She has a global class attack buff, specifically to casters, and when you E2 her, she will get initial SP on deployment, and that ranges depending on RNG. Her skills. Her skill 2 is very nice. It can hold charges, 2 charges at skill rank 7. It does a large AoE nuke and also splashes to other nearby enemies. So really great AoE on the skill 2. In addition to that, it does a arts resistance debuff to the main target as well, which is really great utility overall. Her skill 3 also does AoE damage. It expands her range to a ridiculous amount, and she can hit up to 5 enemies within that range with a attack percentage buff as well. Overall, if you press skill 3, basically everything on the map is going to die. Her skill 2 definitely is also very solid as well, but her skill 3 is really what she's known for. The issue with Afiala is that her S3 has very high SP cost. You can see right here, it's 80 cost, and she gets an initial of 40 plus talent. So you will be able to fire a couple of these off per stage, depending, but 80 SP is quite high. The second thing, it's more of a nitpick than a major con, I would say, but she does have an RNG dependent talent too. You could get 7 SP, or you could even get 16 SP, and this could maybe mess with some auto deploys a little bit, but for the most part, it's not really that big of a deal, in my opinion. The first 5-star single target caster we are going to be talking about is Amia. Now, Amia is great because she is a welfare unit, and we do get her max potential once you beat chapter 7, which is very nice. So everybody gets Amia for free, and she is definitely worth investing in. A few pros for her is she has a really awesome E2 talent, which allows her to gain self SP and also bonus SP when she attacks or kills an enemy. So she's going to be getting her skills quite frequently if you take advantage of this talent. In addition to that, her S3 is one of the few skills in this game that does true damage. So she is going to get a large attack percentage buff and also do true damage, which is very helpful, especially for the stage 718, the last stage of chapter 7. I'm not going to get into spoilers of why she's so good into this stage or what you have to face, but I will have you know that if you do have an E2 Amia, it's going to really help you for one of the hardest stages in the game as of right now. She's also quite tanky, and even ignoring her HP gain from her skill 3, she has the highest flat HP in the entire caster class, so she is going to be pretty tanky for you. She also gets 3 skills, even though she's a 5-star, so that's even more bonus value as well. And a bit of a spoiler here, but she does get a class change some point in chapter 8. So if you really like your Mia, you do get a really badass guard version of her, where she transforms into a guard. This is the only character that will be getting a class change of some sort, specifically because she is the main character of the story. But, excuse me, be on the lookout for that. It's going to be pretty freaking sweet, not going to lie. A couple downsides to Amia is, number one, her skill 2 and her skill 3 are both very tricky to time, and they're kind of difficult to use. Her skill 2 gives her a very hefty stun, 10 seconds, even at skill rank 7 once her skill ends, and it doesn't really give her that much of a bonus, in my opinion. Her skill 3, although it does very nice DPS, she gets forcibly retreated after the skill's over. So you're going to need to redeploy her. You're going to have to wait for her redeployment time of 70 seconds without potential up. And then you're going to need to redeploy her as well. And the SP cost is very high, like 120 SP with no initial. Like, despite her having really solid SP gain at E2, 120 is nothing to scoff at, to say the least. Lastly, she doesn't even have an E1 talent. She only unlocks a talent at E2. You can see right here is the question marks. And we're not really quite sure what this is as of the time of me filming this video. But basically, she only has 1 talent, and you only get it at E2. I do think, though, since everybody has this character, I think she is definitely worth building, at least to E1 mid to high level. She is going to be very helpful for you guys in the future for sure. After this is another welfare single target caster. This is the 5-star Absinthe. Absinthe is a very unique character, and I think she's pretty slept on, to be quite honest. She does execute damage. That's what her whole kit is really based around. Her talent, she does bonus damage to enemies that are less than 40% HP at E1 and E2. And in addition, her skills prioritize targets that have below a certain SP threshold. At skill 2, she won't even target enemies unless they're below 50% HP. So she does really great execute DPS as well. Her S1 has an infinite duration, meaning it's literally up for the entire rest of the stage. And she does pretty solid DPS overall. The issues with Absinthe is her target priority can be a bit tricky and might even kind of screw you over sometimes. She also has pretty high SP cost. I mean, her skill 1 is 78 and no initial SP, and her skill 2 is 54. Granted, this skill is infinite, but regardless, it is still a high SP cost, so I'm definitely going to mention it. The last 5-star single target caster we're going to be talking about is Nightmare. Now, Nightmare is pretty unique because her skill 1 is actually a heal, and her skill 2 focuses mainly on slowing the enemy instead of just doing arts damage. Her talent gives her evasion, physical, and arts, which is quite nice if you're using her skill 1. And if you're using her skill 2, it gives her a percentage attack buff. So that is also pretty unique, how her talent changes depending on the skill. Her skill 1, it does a pretty nice burst heal, but the SP cost is just ridiculously high. It's 80% for a heal. Even though the heal is pretty sizable, it's very difficult to time, I would say. And her skill 2, it does true damage as well, which is quite nice, but there's a lot of counter synergy with this skill. Like, she can apply this to 3 targets, which is nice, but the true damage is proportional to distance moved. Now, she slows their speed by 60%, so they're not going to be moving very far at all. So they're not actually going to be taking that much true damage. On paper, this seems okay, but in practice, it's just like, it just really screws itself over. What is very helpful to with this skill is using shifting characters like a puller or a pusher to really maximize the distance that they travel, so they take a ton of true damage for that. But that requires a fair amount of setup overall, and yeah, this character requires very particular skill timings, so I don't think I would really recommend her to beginner players. In addition to that, she gets no initial SP on her skill 2. Even though the SP cost is still pretty low, the SP cost on skill 1 is just ridiculously high. The first 4-star single target caster I'm going to be talking about is going to be Click. Click is, in my opinion, one of the best 4-star characters in the entire game, and I'll explain why. So first off, she has a drone mechanic tied to her, so she has a drone that attacks the same unit she's attacking. It essentially doubles her overall DPS because it scales off of a percentage of her attack, which is very nice, and it also does arts damage. Her skill 2 does a bunch of different stuff. It expands her overall range, it gives her a percentage attack buff, and the drone now follows and locks onto an enemy, and it does not go away until that enemy dies or the skill duration ends, which is 26 seconds long at skill rank 7. It also has a small chance to do a mini stun, so that's just a bunch of added utility. So she's going to be attacking one enemy, the drone's going to be attacking a different enemy, so she's just doing double duty on the DPS plus a mini stun. So overall, I mean, this character does quite a bit. Some issues with the Click. She is quite squishy. So overall, she can take a lot of damage. So you do have to be pretty careful about placement order. Next up, she has an RNG stun. So it's only a 23% chance to stun at skill rank 7. And it also is a very minuscule stun. 0.7 seconds is not too long of a time. It is a bit of added utility, but like I said, it's pretty RNG dependent. Next, we have Haze, the other 4-star single target caster. So Haze, she has a debuff talent, which is quite nice. It inflicts a arts resistant debuff to the enemies that she attacks for a set amount of time, in this case 1 second, and that is not buffed by any potential ups or anything like that. She also has a pretty nice S2. It gives her a percentage attack buff, and it gives her an attack speed buff, so she's going to be firing pretty quickly. The issues with Haze, there are a couple. Number one, she is just naturally quite squishy, but she becomes even more squishy when she activates her S2. You can see here, minus 75% max HP. That is a huge amount of HP lost just to get a pretty small, it's a decent amount of DPS gain, I would say. In addition to that, she also has no initial SP on her skill 2, which is going to be the primary skill you're going to be using here. The SP cost itself isn't too high, but 0 initial SP is never really a good thing. Now we have the 3-star single target caster, Steward. I actually quite like Steward. I think he is definitely slept on for sure. And he's super easy to build, being a 3-star operator. So he only needs the LMD for the E1 upgrade. He's also very free-to-play friendly. He's super easy to get. I think you might actually get him for free in Chapter 1 or Chapter 2, if I'm not mistaken. Either way, you could just get him super quickly from recruitments as well. In addition to that, he does prioritize the highest defense enemies, so he will be good against some of the tankier, physically tanky enemies, rather. Some issues with him, obviously he's a 3-star, so he's going to get outscaled. You cannot E2 this character, sadly, so he's going to get hit a max cap of E155. In addition to that, he is also very squishy as well. I mean, you can see his stats over on the left. He has quite low max HP and also one of the lowest defenses out of these single target casters, so he's going to get blown up pretty quickly. His skill itself actually does quite decent damage. It's very consistent DPS because it is an auto attack enhancement. And the SP cost for that is quite low. So the last single target caster we're talking about is the 2-star Durin. She is extremely easy to build. All you need to do is to level her up to 30. She's very free-to-play friendly. You do get her for free from completing story missions. She's also cheap. She's a 12 cost source of arts damage, which is never terrible. And she does have a arts evasion talent when she hits level 30 or max level. Issues with Durin. She is literally a piece of paper. She is so damn squishy. Obviously, as a 2-star, she's going to get outscaled because you can't even E1 her. And she also doesn't even have any skills to use. So there's no like bonus effects from using her. It's just an auto attack machine, basically. Overall, she's okay. I think all the 2-stars are worth investing in, personally. But you're definitely not going to be able to bring her throughout the entire main storyline or anything like that. Next up, we're going to talk about the AoE casters. The first one being Ifrit. Now, Ifrit is really awesome. She has a arts resistance debuff on both her S3 and her talent. Her talent does at E2 minus 40% to all enemies within her attack range. So that is a massive resistance debuff for sure. Her S2 is really great because it can hold charges and can get to 3 charges at skill rank 7. So overall, this is going to have crazy good uptime and value. In addition to that, it also does a minus 200 flat defense and burns the target for 3 seconds. So a nice little damage over time effect as well. And she has a very, very interesting attack range. You can see at E2, it's just like this long straight line. This can be a bit tricky to use, I would say, but there are what is known as God tiles for Ifrit, where it's just her at the end of a long hallway or a space where she can cover 3 different lanes at once. So this character, if you are really have a keen eye for this character's range, this character is an absolute monster. She has crazy high attack. I mean, look at that, 772, and then her modifiers are quite nice, or her percentage buffs rather are quite nice on her skill 2 and her skill 3. So overall, I mean, she's going to be doing crazy damage. Some issues with her, yeah. Like I said, her range is both a pro and a con. It's tricky to use, but in some stages, it's absolutely broken, man. It's so crazy. Her S3 does self-damage, so she actually injures herself, loses 2% of HP every second, which isn't too big of a deal, in my opinion. She has no initial SP on her skill 3, but she has a really good value on her skill 2. And her DP cost, like all AoE casters, is just ridiculous. She has a 34 DP cost at E2 and no pots. Next up is this lovely little blueberry here, Mustima. She is the second AoE caster who's a 6-star. And she adds a lot of utility to your team comp. First of all, she gives all caster allies additional SP recovery, and any enemies within her attack range have a movement speed debuff or movement speed reduction on them. And this is her attack range. It's a 3x3 box in front of her. Now, her skill 2 has a really great crowd control. It has really great CC. So it is 6 1-second stuns at skill rank 7. And I say 6 1-second stuns because this ability has really long-lasting active frames, meaning that if you activate the skill early and an enemy walks into her death box, she will continue to stun them for the rest of the skill duration. It's not just one stun and they're gone. It's 6 1-second stuns. And in addition to that long stun duration, she also does bonus percentage arts damage every second that they're in there as well. So she's doing a really solid DPS, a really solid damage rather, and a very long CC ability for sure. In addition to that, her skill 3, I mean, you can see her range gets absolutely massive. This is the arts damage swing. I'm going to talk about Silver Ash later, but this is like the arts damage equivalent. She just does these very large arts damage slashes rippling across this large attack range, and she increases her talent effect. So she increases her slow by 3 times the amount. So she's going to be slowing those enemies a crazy amount, pushing them back with very small amount of force, and doing very big AoE damage overall. Issues with Mustima is that she has, well, first of all, she is very expensive. Like Ifrit, she's a 34 cost unit without potentials at E2. So she is very, very expensive. You're not going to really get her onto the field till later on. And also, she has one of the highest, if not the highest, SP cost in the entire game. Her skill 3 is a 110 SP cost. So you're going to basically get that off maybe once or twice, and that's going to be it. Her skill 2 also has a pretty high SP cost as well at 56. So even if you include her talent for SP regen, it's still a fair amount of time that you're just not going to have her skill up. Now we're going to talk about the first of the 5-star AoE casters. This is Leonhardt. I think he's a pretty slept-on unit as well. I think he's quite strong. Let's just talk about his kit. First of all, he is a stackable attack percentage buff as a talent, and it depends on the amount of enemies within his attack range. Second of all, his skill 2 is just absolutely dirty. He increases his attack range to a 3x4 box, which is very nice. It does a bonus of 200% arts damage to all enemies within that range. He slaps down on the ground and does a shockwave, basically, of a large amount of arts damage, which in addition to doing quite a large nuke, this ability could hold charges, and it reduces the arts resistance of those targets for 6 seconds. And 6 seconds is quite a long debuff for sure. In addition, I mean, this is a pretty cheap ability despite not having any initial SP, only 13 cost. So if you pair this thing with like Liscarm or any other like Telopsis, any other SP gain characters, he's going to be slapping the ground quite frequently. The issue with Leonhardt is that his talent is, it's kind of hard to achieve the max amount of value from it. I mean, it's stackable up to 5 times for a total of 20 additional percent on the attack. Most of the time, you're not going to have 5 enemies just standing in front of him. So it's kind of a weird way to, it's kind of hard to set up, I would say. Most of the time, you're going to be getting like 4 to 12 maybe percent, and 12% is nothing to scoff at, but you're not really going to be getting that full 20%, which can be a little bit tricky to obtain. So next up, we have Skyfire. Skyfire is the second AoE 5-star caster, and she has some pretty nice talent. She increases the damage of blocked enemies. She increases the arch damage they take by a percentage amount. So at E2, it's up to 15%, which is quite solid. And in addition to that, her S2 does a large amount of arts damage and also does a little mini stun on them as well. Some issues with Skyfire is number 1, her skill 2 increases her attack interval by 70%, which is it's just ridiculous. It almost doubles her attack speed, or halves her attack speed rather, and AoE casters already have quite slow attack speed, so she is attacking at a pretty sluggish pace. Also, her skill 2, even though it does have a mini stun, the stun is only 0.2 seconds, so for that amount of windup, it's not really stunning for that much. And thirdly, I would say Skyfire, her initial SP on her skill 2 is also non-existent. Granted, 29 SP cost isn't really that high. It's only 29 seconds of waiting, plus maybe any bonuses from other characters. But starting at 0 initial SP is pretty rough. It can be kind of a slow start. So the first of the AoE 4-star casters is going to be Gray. Now, Gray is more on the side of utility than he is of DPS. So what Gray is going to be doing is his attacks inflict a slow, and his skill 2 is going to increase his attack speed, meaning he gets that slow out much faster, and then it's also going to increase the potency of that slow by 1.5 times. So overall, his DPS, I would say, is quite low, and his SP cost compared to his initial SP is very, very high, but he does have a small bit of utility to his kit. So next up is going to be Katano, and Katano, she gains 1 of 3 buffs when she is deployed, them being attack percent, attack speed, and HP percent. And her skill 2 is nice because it hits all targets in a 3x4 range. So she's going to be doing pretty decent damage to a lot of units depending on your skill activation timing. Issues with Katano. She has an RNG talent. So you could get screwed over and get HP percent every time. And that's going to be rough for sure. Her skill 2 also stuns her for 13 seconds after her skill ends, and 13 seconds is quite a bit of time as well. And she also has a very high SP cost on her skill 2. It's 90 SP cost. I mean, you're going to be waiting 40 seconds after you deploy her, and then a whole minute and a half after she recovers from that 13-second stun. So the 3-star AoE caster is Lava. She actually has pretty comparable DPS to Katano, her 4-star counterpart, which is nice. She's extremely easy to build like all other 3-stars because she does. She only needs the LMD for the upgrade, and she's super easy to acquire. You get her for free, and overall, she is super free-to-play friendly for sure. Some issues with Lava is she is extremely squishy, of course. She has very low HP and pretty low defense for casters. She also is, of course, outscaled, being a 3-star character, and her S1 is just an attack speed buff. It's okay, but overall AoE casters have pretty low attack speed anyways, so it's basically her just catching up. What I forgot to mention is that she does, even though it says 40 SP cost initial SP 0, she actually does get initial SP on her talent. Most of you guys, I mean, if you do build her, she's going to be max pot anyways, so she's only going to need 5 SP when you deploy her to get that first skill activation off if you do decide to build her. So overall, I mean, I do think she is worth building, at least to some degree, like all 3 stars are. She'll do very nicely in the early game and some mid game stages as well. But now we're going to get into the last of the AoE casters, which is 12F. 12F is a 2-star, so you can only level him up to 30. He has no skills, but he's quite nice because he has actually a really solid 50% physical evasion, so similar to Durin's 50% arts evasion. So you actually could see him being used in like a stage like 718 or the Inferno stage 4 in chapter 7, as well as a meme mainly, but you know, the RNG is with him sometimes. Like all low rarity operators, he is super easy to build. For arts, AoE arts damage, he is very cheap at a whopping 24 cost. I personally think he does pretty decent DPS. I mean, I would use him for the chip stage 2 for snipers and casters to get E2 chips for my casters and snipers. I mean, I would use him on the right side there, and he would kind of hold his own, not gonna lie. So I definitely think 12F is worth investing in. I mean, it's super cheap anyways, but he is quite squishy. He does have no skills, and obviously he is outscaled as well. The third subclass we're going to be talking about is the modal casters. Now, modal casters, modal means they have different modes. So in these 2 characters' cases, they have a defense mode and an attack mode. In the defense mode, they are not auto-attacking at all. They are idle, but they gain a lot of defensive stats. And they can tank quite a bit of damage, like defender levels of damage. Then they have their offensive mode where they activate their skill and do AoE arts damage, which is quite nice, but it's a bit tricky to time for sure. Now, the first of the modal casters is Beeswax. She is extremely tanky. I mean, she can face tank Sarkaz, infected bone throwers. She is just an absolute monster if you have enough investment into her. It's great because both her skill 1 and her skill 2 do AoE arts damage. She even gets a even further range expansion on her skill 1, which is quite nice. Her skill 2 is awesome because she summons an obelisk from the ground and it stuns for 1.5 seconds at skill rank 7, and it works as a pseudo defender. So her obelisk can tank damage and also block enemies, which is very nice. While the obelisk is blocking enemies, she does AoE arts damage to them. Some issues with her is she has no basic attack like all modal casters, and she loses out on that tank capability once she does start doing damage, and vice versa. So it can be a little tricky to get used to using her. The second modal caster is going to be Mint, and you guys saw Mint in my operator building guide. If you guys watched that, Mint is also a modal caster, and Mint is great because she's a welfare unit, so you get her for free if you participated in the event at all. And you can get her max pot as well. She is also quite tanky. And she does a very unique tile buff. So in the tiles adjacent to her, up, down, left, and right of her, she gives those allies a defense percentage buff, which is quite nice. And in addition to that, when she activates her skill, it says they reduce her taunt level, and that can be, it's worded a little bit weirdly. Basically what that means is when you activate her skill, her target priority goes down. So some enemies that would target her normally will actually try to target somebody else instead, So it's kind of like a pseudo stealth mechanic, which is quite helpful when she loses all that tankiness from skill activation. In addition to that, she does AoE arts damage on both her skill 1 and her skill 2. Her skill 1, she gains a large range just like Beeswax, and her skill 2, unlike doing a stun, she actually turns into a washing machine and cycles and shifts the enemies around her to come closer to her, which is quite nice. Some issues with Mint is that unlike Beeswax has natural health regen built into her kit. Mint does not, so she can't solo tank as well as someone like Beeswax could. In addition to that, she doesn't have a basic attack like all modal casters. She loses out on that tankiness or the damage depending on the skill activation. And her positioning can be a little bit weird because she's doing shifting and pulling. It's really hard to make use out of that skill to get actual decent full value from it. In addition to that as well, it's not super tricky, I would say, but positioning is a factor you have to think about in order to get that percentage defense buff from her talent. Okay, so the last two characters fall into subclasses of their own. The first one being Lazy, she's a chain caster, meaning that her attacks bounce up to 3 times. She does have an attack buff against unblocked units, so any units that are not blocked, she is going to be doing bonus damage to them. And also, her skill 2 is very nice because normally her attacks that bounce, they do reduced damage per bounce, but in this case, when she has her skill 2 activation, it actually removes that reduction, so she's going to be doing full damage to each of the targets, which is quite nice. Some issues with Lazy, like I said before, those bounces reduce the damage, which can really limit her DPS that she does. She's also almost as expensive as an AoE caster. I mean, 32 cost. She's almost as expensive as Ifrit, and she does like literally half the damage as her. Her SP cost is quite high. I mean, at skill rank 7, it's an 80 cost ability. So very, very long time to charge up after the first one. And her trait, although it does do a solid amount of percentage attack buff, damage buff rather, getting unblocked enemies and finding a lot of unblocked enemies is going to be quite rare because most of the time you're setting your DPS to, hit the blocked enemies that your defenders are holding. So it can be kind of a niche trait, and you might not get full value out of this consistently. The second character is going to be Tamimi. She's a welfare operator. I don't have a name for the subclass. You could call her a stance change, which is pretty similar to modal, but she is a stance change character. And by that, she has 2 forms. Her regular form is just a ranged caster, and then when she activates her skill, she switches to melee mode and does physical damage, only hitting ground units. And she gets a attack percentage buff as well from this. Now, she's great because she is welfare, but she doesn't really have much going for her besides that, sadly. A couple different things. First of all, her skill 2, despite having some decent effects, is very RNG. Like RNG on whether you can even get one of the following effects. The only way to get it to 100 is to M3 it, which is an absolutely crazy requirement to get 100% on a skill. The stun is okay. The nuke is pretty nice, and the splash damage can also be quite nice as well, but you only get a 70% chance. That is just really unfortunate for Tamimi. In addition to that, she only hits ground units, so she can't hit drones. So she's just a guard with really unfortunate, range. She only can hit 3 tiles around her, so the range reduction is absolutely ridiculous on her. I really feel like this character had a lot of potential because the stance change mechanic is very cool, but she's just... I think the execution did just kind of drop the ball on this character, specifically because she's a welfare unit, but hopefully we see more characters like this in the future, just tuned a little bit differently, I would say. So that's it for the caster rundown, guys. Hopefully all of this information gave you a bit of insight on who you want to build and use in game. Now, the pros and cons list was a collaborative effort between me and the people in Twitch chat. So if you guys think I missed anything or I did your waifu dirty and they actually have a lot more pros than we mentioned, then definitely tune into the streams. I do all the spreadsheets and the pros and cons list on stream in the mornings, so definitely check that out. Or drop a comment down below. The last thing I want to say, though, is thank you guys so much for the support. The last few videos have been kind of popping off, and I really, really love to see all of your nice comments. Like I said before as well, all of the resources, including the spreadsheet that we made and the A-Ship toolbox, will be in the description. So any of these spreadsheets, these pros and cons lists, you guys have access to view at any time. Thank you guys all once again, and peace out.